Hello there, I'm K-Ball, and welcome to Human Skills, where I interview tech industry leaders about all the non-technical skills that go into success in the tech industry. Kristen Spencer took a non-traditional path to tech. She taught herself to code during maternity leave, then got involved with boot camps, teaching, and eventually got fully into the tech industry. From there, her bent towards teaching and human skills quickly led her into management, and today she is Director of Engineering at League, a leading Canadian healthcare platform. This conversation focused around diversity of race, diversity of culture, neurodiversity. There are a multitude of different ways that who we are, how we show up, and how we are treated vary in this world. We talked about the ways that those differences can lead to challenges and ways that we as individuals and leaders can work to overcome those challenges for ourselves and our teams so that we can all thrive. Please enjoy this conversation with Kristen Spencer. Kristen, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, I'm excited to get to talk to you. So let's maybe start with you sharing a little bit about your background and your lens into this problem domain that we've been calling human skills.
Yeah, thank you. As you mentioned, my name's Kristen. My current role, I'm a director of engineering at a platform healthcare company called League. And we're building improved consumer experiences for everybody who needs to use the healthcare system, which is literally everybody, hopefully, if we can be successful in our mission. So I lead some product engineering teams. I have an org of 50 people right now, which is fantastic. And I've been at this company for 2 years. Before that, I had a background in digital consulting. And before that, I kind of got my start in tech through teaching. I taught a front-end boot camp for several years, and I think that really paved the way for me to build an interest and a desire to go into a management role, which I have since done.
Nice. One of the things I'd love to sort of dig in there is that entry into tech, because as I talk to folks, I discover that very few of us actually got into technology by the road that is the sort of model that people put out there. Oh, you go and get a computer science degree and then you get your software development job and what have you. So kind of how did you get into that teaching at a boot camp, and what were you doing before that you brought with you?
Yeah. Well, I consider myself a non-traditional tech background. I do not have a computer science degree, and I learned to code when I was on maternity leave with my firstborn son, who's turning 10 this summer, which
Wild.
is blowing my mind.
I know mine just turned 10 earlier this year, and it is
something about the double digits. It's just my brain can't compute it, but it's very cool. And before that, I had held different roles in the health and fitness industry. I was kind of really hadn't found my path and a career that I could get really excited about. And becoming a parent triggered maybe a bit of an existential crisis about what am I building? What am I doing here? And I was also, frankly, a little bored. We're very lucky. I'm based in Canada, and we have the ability to take a year of maternity leave, which is wonderful. But it's also a year at home with a small potato that doesn't really do much for a while. And so I love learning, and I'm always kind of looking to expand my knowledge and skill set. And I one day took a workshop on HTML and CSS because I had a WordPress blog at the time, and I wanted to learn how to customize my theme. And I think this is actually a pretty common story that you'll hear as an entry point into tech. From people around my age. Either we're customizing our themes, or if we got into it a bit sooner, our MySpace profile pages or what have you, right? We just want to see how we can have a little bit more control over our online presence. But that kind of really opened the door for me to this whole world where there was this industry that I had never really kind of considered myself a candidate for. And I realized, hey, no, this stuff is learnable, and I think I could be quite good at it. And so I followed that path, and I kept learning. I ended up enrolling in a front-end boot camp, which is the one I ended up teaching at for 4 years as a student. And so initially it was, hey, this will be a great way for me to have a little bit of side income. I can build some websites on the side while I figure out what I want to do with my life. But it turned out that what I want to do with my life is work in tech and build software. I don't do that myself anymore, but I enable teams to do that. But it's an incredibly rewarding role, and something I love about the industry is that you can come from any background, and as long as you have the interest and the drive to pick up some skills and practice and feel like an absolute beginner that doesn't know what they're doing over and over again, then you can make your way into the industry. It's of course, a lot of privilege comes with that as well. I happened to make some great connections that have helped me get into my first couple roles. But nobody has ever looked to see my university credentials to see if I am qualified to do my job. I can show that I can do my job by being able to do my job really well. So,
yeah, absolutely. Well, you've kind of pointed a little bit to one of the themes that I think we're going to talk about a lot today, which is this concept of diverse people in the workforce. Our industry is dominated by people who kind of look like me, right? White men, probably grew up in a middle class neighborhood, something like that. And yet, as you highlight, one of the beautiful things here is there are very few explicit gatekeeping criteria. There's a lot of implicit gatekeeping, but you don't need to get a PhD or get a doctorate or an MD or something like that to get into our industry. So how do you think about enabling folks coming in from those different backgrounds that maybe are facing barriers getting in those implicit barriers? How do you build a team that really supports them? How do they as individuals kind of climb up into this space?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something I think about all the time, and I think that in the past several years, with the advent of programs like coding bootcamps and also a plethora of really high quality online content, there's less barriers to learn the skills. Getting in the door is one thing, and a lot of places have done a really great job at increasing diversity on teams in that entry level role, right? We're bringing a lot of new, different types of backgrounds and experiences into tech. But where we're still struggling is how do we then, once they're in, create environments where people can grow and thrive and progress in their careers. And so we're still seeing at more senior levels, particularly on the technical IC track, but still in management roles as well, the number of women you see in these roles drops off. The number of people of color you see on these roles drops off the more senior you get. And that's kind of really focused on the types of barriers and underrepresentation that we can see by looking at somebody. There's this whole host of invisible barriers that exist that we're learning more and more about now, more neurodiversity in the workplace. If somebody exists on some sort of spectrum, they don't have to tell you, and they might not even know themselves. And we're learning more and more about how many people are really finding later in life, especially after we've gone through a pandemic and lockdowns, we've moved to remote work. It's been a big wake-up call for a lot of people, myself included, realizing, hey, there's something kind of going on here that I didn't really recognize about myself. But now that all of these structures have kind of fallen apart and we're left with, I'm at home with my computer and not a lot of structure in my day, and my social interactions have changed, we're realizing, oh, maybe there's something to look into here. So for me, it's really been eye-opening as I've gone through my own journey of recognizing my own neurotype, that I had no idea until I was in my late 30s that this might have been something that had impacted me. So how many people like me or not like me are out there struggling on some level and blaming themselves rather than being able to understand, hey, there's just something different about the way my brain works. And our environment, our workplace environment, is not really set up for us to be able to thrive. And it's not any problem. It's just the environment, cultural, social conditions that have made things more challenging.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like there are parallels there between, I heard the word thrive a lot. I heard talk about the environment, whether your difference is visible or invisible. There's this same core question of what can you do to set yourself up to thrive, and what can leaders do to set up an environment where individuals thrive? How would you approach that? Let's maybe start from the individual level. If you're an individual, you're coming in, you're different from your coworkers, whether it's a visible difference, be it gender, race, sexual orientation, what have you, or it's an invisible difference. You have some form of neurodiversity. What can you do to set yourself up to thrive?
Yeah, that is very dependent, first of all, on how psychologically safe you feel in your role in your organization. This can vary greatly. So you might be in the situation where you feel quite comfortable disclosing something about yourself that might be different, or specific accommodations that you might need, but you might not. So assuming that maybe you're not so lucky and you're not feeling like this is a place where you want to have that type of conversation. My perspective is that what everybody can do, no matter whether you identify as neurodiverse or what have you, is have a conversation with your team members, with your manager, about expectation setting, ways of engaging with each other. This is a really important thing to do for any new relationship, I think. And it's often something that we skip over. We make a lot of assumptions about what good work looks like, what an engaged employee acts like, and how they interact with others. So having an early conversation with the people that you're working with, particularly your manager. How do you like to receive feedback? How do you like to set deadlines? Do you like to come up with your own prioritization, or would you prefer a little bit more coaching as to what is the most important thing to be working on? These types of things can help everybody be more successful at work, no matter who you are. And it's really worth taking the time at the beginning of the relationship, if you can, to have those kinds of conversations.
I love that. And it highlights to me one of the key kind of disadvantages you get by being different, which is that your set of assumptions is probably different from the sort of operating set of assumptions going on in your environment.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this can be so cultural too. There's, we have a book club at work, and we recently read The Culture Map, which I'm blanking on the author, but it was a fantastic read, and really eye opening. And it spoke about how even the culture of your country or your region in the world comes with their own kind of assumptions on ways of communicating that are professional or not professional. And so there's just so many dimensions to think about this on. When we opened up our hiring in the engineering department to include more international employees, that was a real learning curve for us to figure out how to set expectations with team members that didn't live in North America. There can be huge differences in how the manager and report relationship ought to work. And so part of that has been setting expectations about the culture of the organization in the context of the country that the headquarters are in, and all of this kind of thing. Because you can have a lot of misunderstandings, and you can have some folks that aren't getting the visibility and the support that they need based on assumptions that everybody's making about who's supposed to be initiating that conversation.
That makes sense. Do you have a concrete example you can share that shows the problem and then how you resolved it?
I think without zeroing in on any individual, I think a broad example is when we're breaking down engineering work and we're writing tickets for tasks. Do you expect, as the engineer, that absolutely everything expected of you is documented in this task? And if you have a thought, hey, this is maybe not going to be the best approach to solve this problem, and I have another idea, what do you do with that? Do you keep quiet and execute on the task as it's been described by your lead or your manager? Or do you take a moment to have a conversation, pull in some people, say, hey, I'm thinking that this might be a better approach? our culture, our workplace culture very much favors the second, right? We want our team to be coming to us with new ideas, helping us see things from a different angle. This is the beauty of having a diverse team, is people think differently, and then they can call out things that we might not have noticed. But if you're coming from a previous employer or a culture where things are a lot more hierarchical, it might look like insubordination to be saying, hey, I don't think this is the right way to be building this feature, and I think we should be doing something else. So making sure that people know that it is safe to raise questions, to have a conversation, to challenge maybe an approach, even if it's somebody more senior than you that has suggested this approach, is going to make us build a better product and have better results overall. But if people aren't feeling like safe to do that, and like that might make them look like they're, I've already used the word insubordinate. It seems like such an extreme word, but yeah, if you don't know that that's
true.
Exactly. And you have to create that safe container for people to say, no, we want our engineers to be coming with new ideas and challenging our assumptions, rather than simply executing on tasks.
Okay. So how do you make it feel safe?
Yeah. Well, I think it all comes down to, again, just communicating about it early on when somebody joins your company or joins your team, saying, a lot of companies will have skills ladders or salary bands when they've hit a certain size. So if you have something like that to go through with your new team member and say, hey, here are the skills that we're looking to evaluate when we're doing performance reviews. And let's talk through some actual examples of how these skills are demonstrated at this company. Just like you're asking me for examples now, bringing in examples, of things that have happened at work that they can look to. You can reference documentation. You can think through scenarios to really, really understand, because it can be very difficult to look at a list of skills on a document and know, okay, so what does showing leadership or project management skills actually mean in practice? So just taking the time to have that conversation goes a long way.
Absolutely. Well, let's say you're an individual going into a new company and your manager doesn't have that conversation with you. What can you do to suss out the norms in this space and what's safe for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. It can be really hard and kind of scary sometimes to be the one that has to bring that conversation to the forefront. So coming in with, clearly stating your expectations for the conversation, saying, hey, I want to do great work, and I want to be, comfortable contributing to this company. So I'd love to have a conversation about what good looks like. I think from Brene Brown's work, Dare to Lead, there's a kind of a phrase in there: paint what done looks like, or paint, set clear expectations for what a project done well looks like. So if you have a project that's been assigned to you, defining success criteria for that project, that is a conversation I would love for my team members to come to me and say, hey, can we talk about if X, Y, and Z is accomplished, do we both consider this project to be a success? Having those kinds of alignment conversations is really great. In general, if there isn't any sort of documentation on engineering cultural norms, asking about what is our code review process and what are the expectations around that, right? Do we do code reviews? Do we require two approvers? If somebody has a change request and I make it, can I merge it, or do I have to wait for another approval? All of these little things are really, really important to know going into your role. And they're not always well documented depending on what stage your company's at. I think that any engineering manager would be happy to have their new report look for clarity around these expectations, because it's often not the fact of not caring or not having the time. Well, actually, it is a factor sometimes of not having the time, depending on what's going on. Maybe nobody's written that documentation yet, so it doesn't exist. And then, treating every new person joining your team as an opportunity to reflect on are we setting up our new employees for success? And how much of this conversation that we're having or issues that are coming up could be resolved by creating some clear documentation, adding some content to an onboarding session, things like this. We can be iterative about getting better and better at creating these safe containers where people understand the unspoken rules of operating successfully in the company.
That makes sense. When we talk about allowing diverse individuals on the team to thrive and grow into those more senior leadership roles beyond the entry level where there at least has been a little progress, is this sufficient, talking about making it, making expectations explicit, or are there other factors that you found important to enable those folks to thrive?
I think a big part of success at a company is having some level of awareness of how you are perceived externally by other leaders in the company or other peers. And this is not a skill set that we all come with naturally, right? I find a lot of folks that are drawn to, technical, creative roles are in it for the craft. They love coding, they love designing, they love building. They don't love navigating the politics of an organization and, all of that kind of stuff that comes more with maybe a management path. So sometimes people need help understanding how their actions are perceived, even if it's not no ill intent or it's nothing wrong, but you can write the most exceptional code and be hugely impactful. But if that impact isn't visible or it's not being perceived as high impact, then you have a problem, right? And so often in these cases, I think it's the role of the manager to help the individual contributor understand, is my work being recognized and seen in a positive light? Is the way that I show up in meetings and conversations being well received? This stuff is really, really hard sometimes. And it's made even harder now that we're all remote and a lot of our communication is written, right? We're not getting tone across on a Slack message in the same way as if we were sitting in a conference room together. And these kinds of small areas where we're showing up in Slack or saying a comment in the Zoom chat in a meeting, those are how people are forming their impressions of you, for good or for bad. And being really aware of that in a way that it's not hopefully completely derailing you because you're scared to post a message for fear of it being perceived wrong, but understanding, hey, it might make sense to put a little bit more care and effort into reading this back to myself, understanding, have I communicated clearly? Have I expressed what I'm looking for out of this interaction? It really can go a long way in building a positive persona of your impact and the helping people realize, oh, you might be a great person to work with if we ever get the opportunity to. I would love to collaborate with this person. They seem awesome, it can make a huge difference.
That makes sense. Yeah. So becoming more mindful of how you are showing up in all the different ways that you're showing up.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the big factors you highlight there is a manager can help you see that.
Yes.
Or a trusted peer could even potentially help you see that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That makes sense. What else is there that's allowing or that will help folks to thrive?
A conversation that we've been having recently at work is we have an architecture review process, and it's not always the most exciting meeting, right? It's often, we're all quietly reading a document and then we're looking for feedback. Anybody have comments? No? Okay, I guess that was it. We've been talking about how do we get people more engaged in the architecture review process, asking the right questions, and so forth. And a lot of it, I think, comes down to thinking about how people like to think. And not everybody is great at thinking on the spot, on the fly in a meeting. I'm certainly not. Often in a large Zoom call, the more people there are, the more distractions there are for me. Being at home is really nice for a lot of people, but for me, it just adds to the things that might distract my attention away from the subject at hand that we're discussing in the meeting. So kind of understanding that having all of the thinking and the workshopping and the solutioning done on the fly on a live Zoom call is only going to work for a very specific subset of people who thrive in that kind of environment. So what are some things that we can do to make our architecture reviews or solutioning meetings more accessible to everybody? Some really small things, sharing pre-read information in advance. So we're going to be going over this document. Here it is 24 hours beforehand. So you can digest it. You can think of questions. You can add comments. Also leveraging, more tools for comment other than just putting your hand up in the meeting. So having somebody be the chat moderator. And if you don't feel comfortable vocalizing your question, you can put it in the chat and the moderator will ask the question for you. That can kind of go a long way in helping reduce barriers for people speaking up because they don't actually have to speak up themselves. Another thing is thinking about how you want people to engage with the content being reviewed. So this is something that I think about when it comes to code reviews as well. If you've got a huge multiple file PR, that can be a lot to digest and consume. And I love when people go through and add comments saying, hey, I wasn't really sure about this decision. I'd love feedback on whether we think this is the right approach or we could do it this way. That gives people an in and a little bit of a guidance on how they should be engaging or how they could be engaging in the conversation.
I love that. I love this idea of signposting the right ways to engage. Are there other places you found that useful throughout either the process of software development or organizational work in general?
Yeah, I think in general, thinking about how you want somebody to engage with your message and what the purpose of your message is hugely helpful. I'm sure my organization is not the only one that has probably more Slack channels than there are stars in the sky. It's so overwhelming and there's a lot of information coming in and out. And sometimes somebody could post, a huge message that you read and then you think, okay, I don't really know what to do with this. Was this just an FYI? Was this something that I needed to take an action on? And then you can see, we're getting into an 80 thread reply with people trying to figure out how to interact with the content, right? So kind of going back to clear communication and setting expectations, you can do this everywhere. It doesn't have to just be when you're meeting somebody new. It can be, hey, I have some information to share. This is the purpose of why I'm sharing this information. This is the type of feedback that I'd like. Or, I need these people to do this by this date, please. Putting all of that information up front and in a concise as possible format really, really helps cut down on information overwhelm and churn in threads and all of this kind of thing. I find a well-placed emoji also is really, really useful. It seems silly, but it can go a long way in helping to convey tone and also just breaking up large chunks of text into more digestible pieces of information.
I love that. Okay, let's maybe dive a little deeper on some of the examples of ways you might be different in the workplace and particular ways that then these different techniques that we've talked about can apply. So one example might be introverts. I feel like this is one that is, we talk about being disadvantaged or being in an underrepresented group. I feel like introverts in the tech industry are probably a well-represented group and yet still at a disadvantage because so much of at least United States and Canada, like America's work culture is optimized for extroverts. So how have you found some of these techniques or other techniques useful for helping people who are introverted in the workplace?
Yeah, I think it is absolutely such a challenge still, even though You're absolutely right. If there's one department that's going to have a higher percentage of introverts, it's going to be the engineering department, because a lot of the work lends itself really nicely to having that kind of way of being. But when it comes to getting promoted, when it comes to getting recognized, we're really, really biased towards who is the most visible and who's the loudest in the meeting, and who are we actually seeing all the time. So I think it's really important to be thinking about how are we as leaders helping give impactful work visibility, rather than it being, oh, you have to go and do a presentation at a engineering review meeting or something like that, right? Public speaking skills are not necessarily the one factor in successful high impact work. And yet somehow it always ends up on people's growth plans that I see, oh, I need to do a lunch and learn, or I need to do this and that. I don't think that's the case, right? But figuring out how to get involvement from our introverted teams at every level. And a lot of this is setting the groundwork for helping people know how to engage in a conversation, like we talked about before, sharing pre-read materials in advance. Another thing is a technique that I picked up from, we have a in-house executive leadership coach at my company who we all do this taste personality survey to get the results that we probably already know. I'm an introvert, or I'm an extrovert, or I'm somewhere in between. But we have this information about our teams, and she suggests using this in a group meeting to allow people to have a little bit more time to think and gather their thoughts. So if you have a team meeting with your whole team, there's 8 of you in there, you say, hey, I'd like to do roundtable updates on this project. You can let me know this information. I'm going to start with Chelsea. She's going to go first, and then we're going to go, and you kind of let people know the order in which they're coming to you in the conversation, with an eye on giving the more introverted team members more time to listen to other people's responses and think about what they want to say. Small things like this, it requires you do a little bit of due diligence on your part to actually get to know who your team is and how they like to show up, right? So you can't curate a conversation like this on the first day. You have to spend time getting to know your team, understanding how they identify, how they think, how they like to engage. But small things like that can sometimes help people have the beat that they need to gather their thoughts and think about their answer and say something instead of being put on the spot.
Yeah, I love that. I love continuing to think about, we are engaging with human beings. They are all unique. How do I support each of them? I'm actually curious. I think, you and I have both been managers for a while. When you say get to know your team and understand what they want, that just feels like, oh yeah, I know what that looks like. But a new manager may be saying, wait, how do I do that? Like, how do you suss out, or can you share any particular questions or activities or other things you do to kind of suss out how someone likes to show up?
Yeah. So there's a lot of great resources online now that have, suggestions for questions for first one-on-ones. One that comes to mind, Laura Hogan has a great template for both giving feedback, which is really useful, as well as great questions for your first one-on-one. And it goes through these types of things. What I love about her questions is it asks questions in a very human way. So rather than it being like, are you an introvert or an extrovert? The question is, how do I know when you're grumpy, and what does that look like? Like, what makes you grumpy about work? And I love that with a way of kind of using the word grumpy, which kind of makes me laugh. And it gets people a little bit outside of the this very narrow way of thinking. People are introverted or extroverted. They are more technical or they have stronger soft skills. We're so much more complex than that. And so thinking about it like, here's a scenario. What would you do in this scenario? Or, humanizing it a little bit with different types of language, like what makes you grumpy? What is the most important thing about work to you is a really good question too. Understanding what is motivating people to show up every day, and understanding that that's not going to be the same for everybody. Becoming a manager is like an immediate crash course in people are not all the same. Oh my goodness. People don't think like me, you know? And it's something that I think not ever people know, but you don't really know until you start having these relationships with people and realizing, wow, we were in the same room and we heard the exact same thing and we came away with two completely just different perspectives on what just happened there. You can't assume anything about anyone, and you have to ask the questions. So doing it in a format where it's more scenario based, it's more what do you like to do? How do you like to spend your time? What types of tasks give you energy? What types of tasks are really draining? That can help you have a more holistic and well-rounded picture of who this person is, and also what motivates them to work, right? For some people, it's just a job, and what motivates them is a paycheck. And you know what? That's totally fine. Now we know that we're optimizing for how do we grow your salary in the quickest way possible based on the constraints that we're working with in this organization and how we promote people. For other people, they're very mission led. They want to be connected to the values of the organization. And so making sure that we're always thinking about that and pulling that into the story of why we're doing our work is going to be really much more impactful for that kind of person.
I love that. Curious, is there anything that stands out to you as sort of the most surprising or different take you've experienced someone have on why they show up to work?
That's a good question. I think, well, you know what? I personally am such a I don't think I'm necessarily an extrovert, but I am very socially motivated. I love people and I love having the ability to make somebody's day better, which is maybe why I got into management. That is such a big driver for me. And it's something that always astounds me when I learn that that's not really what somebody else likes to do. And I recognize, yes, these people exist, but it takes me by surprise every time, honestly, because it's such a core guiding value and principle of mine. I find, yeah, if it's just about, I have no judgment towards folks that are more financially motivated, for example. And a lot of that is just, baseline financial security it's important to me. It's important to a lot of people. But if that is kind of the one thing that drives somebody is just maximizing their income at all costs, regardless of what's going on around them, I find that perspective very, very hard to empathize with because it's so different from me. But it exists, and I have to acknowledge it, and I have to understand, okay, if that's what it is for you, how do we come together and make sure that we're still getting the needs of the business met, the needs of the team met. We're enjoying our time that we have to spend talking to each other, but it is one of those ones where I'm always surprised to learn.
Yeah. Well, and I think you pointed to something important there, which is that financial security is important. And we working in a well-paying industry like we do, I think we need to allow that a lot of people get into this industry to try to achieve that financial security. And that's, as you said, that's totally fine. If that stays your driving motive after you've achieved some level of security, then I have more questions.
Absolutely. And I think that kind of makes me think of another angle, which is, this kind of idea that the only valuable reason to get into tech, to become a software developer or an engineer, is the passion for the code, right? Like, because that's never really been what it's all about for me. It's a really valuable tool. I enjoy it. It's very cool to be able to build something and see it in the hands of somebody. And I love all of that, but it's not what it's all about for me, really. It was a tool to get into a role where I could have impact on the largest amount of people in some way, because, engineering organizations tend to be quite large, right? And so that's a mindset that can actually really discourage people from diverse backgrounds that are getting into tech, because it's a vehicle to more financial stability and security. And it also creates this idea that if you have caretaking responsibilities outside of work, and you don't have time to have side projects and be, always learning, always coding on the side and participating in all of this kind of stuff, that there's no room for you, or you're not going to be able to be successful. So really, any sort of extreme opinions on what is a good reason to enter tech are going to be harmful to some people.
Totally agree. I would be curious. So I know I have wandered around different amounts of balance with caregiving responsibilities, other responsibilities, and trying to keep work in proper balance. Do you have any tactics that you found to be particularly effective for that?
Yeah, great question. This is something that's just a constant struggle. I'm not a person who I have some pretty good boundaries in terms of the workday is over. It's time to spend time with my kids. I can shut my laptop. That's all good. The bigger challenge is turning off the work brain in here, right? And being really
Totally.
present with my kids. And it's become even more challenging with remote work, because there's no separation of work and home. I used to have a commute home, and sometimes that would be a nice transition. But right now, my transition is walking 2 floors downstairs and then just getting right into the mix of getting dinner ready and all of this kind of stuff. So I don't really have good advice. I more have the the uh, the opinion that it's hard. It's very, very hard. And I've tried, a bunch of different things to approach this. None of them with enough consistency to really say, "Hey, I've solved it for myself." But trying to build some sort of activity in between the end of the workday and when family life starts can be really helpful. If it's a walk around the block, if it's do the thing I always want to do is or want to say that I do is, oh, I've done like a meditation, and now I've transitioned into the right headspace and zone. But that's also easier said than done if your inner monologue and thinking about the problems of the workday are much louder than Andy on Headspace. So uh, it, I don't know. It's something I'm constantly trying to work on, trying to figure out how to be more present when I'm not working. But often I find it's a challenge during the week, and then by the weekend I can shift because there's enough space. So allowing enough space is really the key for me. And recognizing, sometimes there'll be a 2 week period where I realize, oh, I've really, really not been present, and saying, hey, like, I think I need a little bit more space. I'm going to take a couple days off just to recalibrate and reset. Is the best I can do right now, because we've got a lot of us have to work, and so we
Yeah.
do. And so it's just prioritizing your own well-being and mental health, and recognizing when things have tipped too far in one direction is something I try to do.
I think that's really key, because I remember it shocked me, but I discovered early in my career that it is entirely possible to burn yourself out doing something you love.
Yes.
Right? Even if you're doing, oh yeah, I just want to keep doing it because I think about it all the time and it's so fun. Like, I know certainly me as a younger self, or in my younger self, a lot of people I talk to, they say, I'm not going to burn out because I like it all. How do you recognize that tipping point in yourself? What cues do you notice, or how do you kind of direct your attention to see, hey, you know what? I might be tipping towards burnout or other mental health challenges.
Yeah, well, I'm lucky enough to have two small humans in my house that will call me out immediately if I'm not paying enough attention to them. They're really they'll let me know if they're like, hey, mommy, like, where are you? Did you hear anything? Because sometimes off in my own thoughts, and they want me to pay attention to whatever they're playing, whatever they built in Minecraft. So that helps, right? Having people holding you accountable. But I think for me, the biggest indicator that things are tipping in a bad direction is my sleep. I work in health tech, and so I have all sorts of sleep trackers and things like this, which you don't need, of course, to know that you're not getting a bad sleep. But I find that these tools do help me to see, oh, I'm not getting enough, of the right sleep phases. I'm really disrupted in the night, waking up or light sleep, or having a hard time falling asleep. And to your point, it's often not that I'm stressed out. It's that I'm too engaged in all of the problems of the day, all of which I'm very excited to solve, but it's just, I don't need to be thinking about them at 3 o'clock in the morning, and that's not productive at all. So I try to kind of pay attention to sleep health and use that as one of my biggest indicators that something needs to shift. And it's maybe it's taking a day off. Maybe it's saying, hey, like, I've gotten out of the habit of going for walks in the morning, and I need to get that back into my day, because there's a connection between me getting a walk early in the morning and having a good night's sleep.
And how do you see these playing out? Like, what is the impact when you get off track to both work and not work?
Yeah, I think it of course impacts both, but honestly, it's my family life that tends to take the biggest hit, because my family, there's the morning when I need to get the kids to school, and then so much energy goes into that work day, right? So much goes into, especially when you're in a people leadership role, being on and being, positive and helping bring energy to meetings and keeping things going. And it's not that it's disingenuous or fake. That's the real me, but showing up in that way takes a pretty significant amount of energy when you haven't had a good night's sleep, right? And so I can often make it work for the workday, and then by the time it's time to have family time, I'm just, completely spent. And so that's what I don't like, is, that it seems like it's the family time that is taking the larger impact when things are off balance. But it's just, the order of events in the day, just kind of impacts that sometimes. So yeah, I think it is interesting, because something that I've recognized is that I don't need to show up and turn it on every single day of the week, and I can set expectations with my team. We have great relationships. I can say, hey, like, let's do a walking meeting, or like cameras off just this one time. And everybody gets it, because it's not like we're all suffering in our own unique ways. These problems of remote work and work-life balance are impacting most of us, I would say. Like, I have not met a person yet who hasn't expressed some challenges with being able to have a family life and a busy career and feeling great the entire time while you're doing it. So I think that also helps my team. I hope it helps my team know that they can take these, give themselves a break in this way too, from time to time, and, go cameras off or reschedule their days so that they don't have meetings for an afternoon as needed. Just building in little recovery times throughout your work week can help shift things in the right direction again.
One of the things you talked about there seems like another direction that might be fun to follow just for a little bit, which is,
Yeah.
you mentioned how you show up, right? And showing up as a people leader, you're bringing energy, you're bringing positivity, you're doing different things very deliberately, kind of deciding how you need to show up in different environments. Do you have any practices that you use for yourself, or that you teach other people for how to kind of show up in the way they want to show up?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's a practice so much as what I try to do. And so, when you're a manager, when you're a people leader, at the end of the day, you're a representation of the business and the decisions that the business make. to some capacity. You're also a lot of other things, but that is one part of your role. And sometimes the decisions that the business makes aren't the decisions that you would make, or that you're not super happy about it, right? And so I find if you have the time, you don't always have the time, but if you do, for me, it is so important to take a moment and really get my mind around what I need to communicate and how I personally feel about it before turning around and communicating it to everybody else. That really helps me show up authentically, right? I don't want to be just a parrot of information from the senior leadership team. But I also don't want to dump my own emotions if they're not super positive on the person that I'm communicating with, right? So being able to have that kind of boundary of, digesting how I feel about something first and then communicating about it really helps me to kind of make sure that I'm showing up in an authentic way, but not in a way that is going to negatively impact somebody, not based on the news I'm delivering, but the way I'm delivering the news.
All right, that's it for this Human Skills interview. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking this video and subscribing to this channel. You can also subscribe to the Human Skills newsletter, which there's a link to right down below, to get notified of interviews like this as they come out. Take care, y'all. This is K-Ball signing out.